Welcome to Sleek Notes eCommerce Boost Podcast, your chance to learn from the eCommerce experts so you can boost your business.
Heyo! Now, does your business have a social media profile? If not, you're missing out on loads of business opportunities. I know, social media can seem like a vast ocean of scariness because when everything is possible, what do? Now, I've spoken with Kevan Lee, who's the Director of Marketing at Buffer, and he's here to throw you a lifeline and help you with your social media strategy from A to Z. Kevan, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really happy to have you here.
Thank you, Julie. It's great to be here.
Can you just start out by presenting yourself? That would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Kevan Lee. I'm the Director of Marketing at Buffer. We are a social media management platform. And I've been in that job for a couple years and been at Buffer for 4 years. I got started there through content and writing. And now I have the privilege of leading the team. We have a great time.
Amazing. So this interview is obviously going to be all about social media strategies. Can you just start out by answering the question we all know too well? What's in it for me? Why should e-commerce stores do social media marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting. We've written a lot about social media marketing on our Buffer blog, and there always seems to be different audiences that we cater our content to. So what's in it for me is an interesting question. I think at the very basic level, like social media it's a very social way of interacting with folks, and like it's very appealing from that very personal one-to-one level. And so I think as a consumer, social media is just a very everyday part of life. And how that translates to businesses then, especially e-commerce businesses, is we tend to see that social is like the new, in the States, we have something called Yellow Pages, which is this giant phone directory that gets delivered to everyone's door once a year that has every phone number in it. And back in the day, you used to thumb through the Yellow Pages to find a business and call them and take advantage of their services. And that's kind of what social media has become, a modern day version of the Yellow Pages. So when people are looking for a service, when they hear about a brand name or are looking for a type of product, they're likely to look to social media first to see, what are their friends saying about it? What's their circle of influence saying about it? They're going to probably search for that word or that business. And if you don't have a social media presence at that point, you're not going to be able to control that story or to have an impact on that story of people looking for you. So at a very basic level, like that's what's in it for businesses, especially e-commerce. But I think there's also the other side of ROI. There's some neat things happening on social with sales and promotion of materials, things that you're selling. So there's always that side of things too, the marketing side. But we like to start with that more like brand awareness focused aspect of social media first.
Great. And why do e-commerce stores have to have a strategy for it? Why can't they just post away what they feel like?
Well, I guess they could. It'd be better than posting nothing, I guess. Strategy is a tricky one, especially for maybe small e-commerce shops that are, I'm sure, have a million things going on, even the big ones with millions of things going on. There's a couple things about strategy. So what we've found is that there can be this kind of lean strategy that you can take on social. And this often works best when you, the individual company owner, shop owner, are very closely tied to the brand itself. So if that's the case, you don't have to have a giant, huge strategy to put into place. You can just kind of be yourself as long as you're okay with your brand being an extension of you also. That doesn't happen for most people, but for some people that works great. An extension of that is if you hire people who are very culturally aligned with the way that your work culture operates. It's a bit easier to slot into a strategy that way. Otherwise, having a strategy is super important so that you are delivering the message that you want to deliver, that you're delivering in a timely way, an on-brand way, a consistent way. If you don't have a strategy, it can kind of go off the rails pretty quickly. Not off the rails in like everything's terrible kind of way, but just it doesn't feel cohesive. And people will notice that. Consumers will pick up on that. So that's kind of where the strategy part comes in. If you don't have a strategy, then you run the risk of kind of alienating an audience at that stage.
I mean, how do you decide what social media to post on or have focus on? Because obviously there's a lot. So how do you decide?
Yeah, that's a good one. It's definitely like one of the first things you would do when coming up with that strategy. There's a couple different ways that we have found work pretty well and that we would recommend. One of them is to do some demographic research. So there's some really cool websites out there. If you search social media demographics, you'll find lots of great information on the kind of distribution of age ranges, gender, somewhat industry, somewhat interests. There's lots of great information out there about who is on which social networks. And so you can kind of find where those demographics dovetail with your demographics and choose those networks that fit and avoid the ones or ignore the ones that don't. Another way to do it is to look at your competitors and to see what social networks they are on, because it's likely that they have found good niches to go to for their audience, and there's likely to be some overlap there. And then otherwise, it's a lot about searching and listening. So we recommend to join every social network and kind of reserve your brand, have this placeholder presence everywhere. But when it comes to being active, you want to seek out the conversations that are happening and the active mentions, active searches. The place where those are happening more often are the networks that it makes sense to be on. So there's basically those three things. It's demographics, it's your competitors, and it's the conversations.
But what about the profile? What does it take to build up a really great social media profile as a business? Learn the basics, find out what elements to definitely include and what other things you should consider. Here's Kevan.
Yeah, it's definitely there's like a base level that you can do that will feel great when someone comes there. You can always, go above and beyond and do more and more. But at the very basic level, you want to have a profile picture, you want to have a cover photo, you want to have a descriptive description. That's a bit redundant, but like you want to have your description in such a way that it's clear and obvious what you do and what you provide and what you sell. Links back to a key page on your website, whether that's your homepage or a catalog page or a new campaign that you're running. And those are like the obvious ones. Location, if you're a location-based company, those are the obvious ones. And then one that people often might skip or not think about is the first few posts in your feed. You want those to be timely or recent. So you don't want someone to come to your profile and see that you haven't posted for 3 or 4 months. And then you also don't want there to just be 2 or 3 posts on there. So ideally you have seeded that with several posts. If this is one of the networks that you've chosen to be active on, there's kind of a history of quality content on there that people can see when they land on your profile.
Great. What about images? Do you have a sort of like a great idea as to what to do with images? I mean, profile pictures and cover photos and all of that.
Yeah, there's some really interesting research on personal profile pictures, which is like smile with a bit of teeth and tilt your head and have this shot from shoulders and above. I don't imagine too many brands and businesses will have personal photos on there. But if you're listening and curious about your own personal profile pic, those are some tips that have worked. For brands and businesses, yeah, it's a bit easier with the profile picture because you can just stick your logo on there. And that's often what people will do. Occasionally, there might be times to alternate that logo or to add some variation to it. Some people add seasonal elements, Christmas, New Year's, Halloween, holidays like that. Some people add like in the news elements. So maybe when there's voting or some cause that's happening. So those are some profile picture options. I think the cover photo is where it gets a bit more challenging because there's not really a basic template you can do there. Some people will show pictures of the products up there. Some people show pictures of their internal teams. Some have really fancy graphics that tell a story up there. So there's a lot more options when it comes to that. But yeah, for profile pictures, we typically recommend and most often see just the logo.
Mm-hmm. And so when you have several profiles, one on Twitter, one on LinkedIn, you name it, should you have different images on the different profiles?
I would say no, both for your peace of mind and ease, but also just for consistent branding.
Great. Also, I know there's one last thing you need to consider before you start posting, which is the tone and voice. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, that is a great one. I'm glad you mentioned it. Um, so tone and voice is the way that it feels when the way that someone feels when they read what you've written. Then it's also the specific words that you use across the board consistently. And some people have voice and tone style guides, and like it's very explicitly listed out within their company. Others kind of take it a bit more ad hoc and natural. Yeah, it's the specifics are going to vary from business to business, but the important thing about having a clear and distinct voice and tone is that it's going to start to feel familiar to the people that follow you. It's going to feel consistent with the brand that you want to put across there. And so basically voice and tone is just about being thoughtful with the way that you communicate on social media. And that, again, can be the words that you use. It can be the general feeling and vibe that your messages send. There's a couple really great voice and tone guides out there. MailChimp has a really nice one. We have a nice one too that our customer support team has put together. So there's some neat examples if you want to draw inspiration from those. And yeah, then it's also great to have, the people who are writing the messages really well in tune with your brand, because then it kind of extends naturally from there.
Really interesting. But I was wondering, so if I wanted to start this and I didn't know really what my tone and voice was, is there any questions I can ask myself to identify that?
Yeah, that is a great one. Yeah, there's some neat articles. We wrote one for the Buffer blog. I think there was one on Distilled's blog that was super useful. So there are some exercises that you can run through to establish that. One of the key questions that we found is, how do you want people to feel when they interact with you? And so for us, that the answer to that was, we want them to feel happy and relieved and well taken care of, listened to. And so that translates into us speaking very clearly with customers, being experts in our field, and not being afraid to. We don't want to dumb things down for folks. We want to clearly explain what we know and what we feel. We want to reflectively listen to people, so repeat back kind of what we heard them say so they can feel listened to. So yeah, it kind of starts with adjectives, and then you can build it out from there, how you get back to that outcome that you want to achieve.
Let's talk about the posting strategy. Once your profile has been updated, the tone and voice has been identified, all of this, it's time to start posting. But how, what, and when? Kevin's got your back.
We have written lots about ideal timing and ideal frequency, and we've kind of shifted that mindset in recent years to be less about like this general ideal time and ideal frequency, and more about like an individual's ideal time, ideal frequency, and individual brands' ideal time and frequency. So you'll learn a lot from just your posting cadence. I'd say if you're just getting started, it's better to post rather than to think about what's the right time to post. Because once you're posting, you can go into your analytics and look and see when things have been most successful for you. What we typically find is there's kind of like a bell curve of attention on social media, and it's usually it usually starts in the morning hours. So when people are commuting, when they're having breakfast, it's quite high during the day when they're at work, taking small breaks, lunchtime. And then again, it's high at the end of the day when they're commuting back home. It's relatively flat in the evenings, especially if you're a B2B company. If you're B2C, there can be, especially e-commerce, there can be a bit more attention in those evening hours. But that we kind of follow it along with what we anticipate our audience to be on social. So if you're a local company, that extrapolates pretty well to like what things are in your local time. If you're an international brand and company, we tend to think a bit more globally with that kind of thing. So we tend to post kind of around the clock 24/7, and there's definitely some tools that help us do that, so we're not awake 24/7. But there's some options there. I think when it comes to ideal timing and frequency, our best practice for that is to watch our analytics and not to think necessarily that we need to post at this particular time of day, especially with the algorithms that surface content at different times. But it's more like when we do post, we want to make sure that post can get as much traction as possible right away, so that the algorithms will pick it up, so that people will notice that it's kind of a viral post. And the way to get that traction right away is to either be present and boost it yourself, to time it when your audience is online, or to time it around an event, and kind of hope for the best after that.
Amazing. What do you have any ideas as to what you should be posting? Because there's a lot of options. You can post images, you can post GIFs, you can post videos, or just pure text. Do you have any experience as to what works best?
Yeah, there's definitely lots of options out there. We have found it's pretty unique from profile to profile, but in general, what seems to be working best these days is video content. Anything short and visual tends to be quite great for grabbing attention. There are some brands that stand out just by using text because it's unique, but those are more the exception than the rule. So anything short and sweet and visual is great. We've used GIFs before, we've used videos before, we've used photos before. And then anything that has like a unique take on it. So rather than a generic stock photo, if there's a photo of you or your business or your team, there's a photo of the product. Those things tend to do better than more generic imagery.
Cool. I did a bit of research on this, and I know you have recommended a 4-to-1 strategy. Can you just explain what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do recommend coming up with a ratio if possible. The 4-to-1 is you choose kind of a main content type. So whether it's a video, an image, a retweet, a quote, basically whatever your go-to content is. For every 5 social media updates that you post, 4 of them should be this go-to content type. And then the remaining 1 can be any of the other types of content. So what this might look like on Twitter, for instance, is that maybe 4 of your posts are just plain text posts. And then every 5th post is a photo or a video or an audio clip or a GIF or something like that. It kind of breaks up, it helps the audience see a consistent pattern to things, but it also breaks up the monotony of having the same thing over and over again.
Amazing. That sounds really interesting. I'm sure a lot of people could use that. So let's go to the final step. It's all about automation and engagement, because obviously once you start posting, hopefully people are going to engage with that content. So if we start with automation, can you automate a lot of processes, or do you even recommend having automated processes for everything?
Yeah, we do recommend like thoughtful automation is probably the best way to say it. Sometimes we want to say authentic automation, but I think that might not work. So we like to think thoughtful automation. And the reason why we say that is that there can be quite a bit of risk to automating on social media. You can risk some poor timing if like something happens and you've already scheduled ahead something completely unrelated that doesn't come off very well. But the bigger problem is kind of this lack of humanity to your content. I think that's a really key thing of social media is that people are expecting a human brand to a certain degree, or at least maybe resonating more with human brands than with these very automated experiences. So we like to, automation in moderation, and there's some ways to do that. So we do automate a lot of our posts, and it can mean so many different things. Specifically, what it means for us is that we do schedule our social media posts up to a day in advance, and also we schedule them over the weekend. So we do that in conjunction. We do that in conjunction with an engagement plan. So we know when stuff is going out, and we are ready to respond when people engage with it. So the content itself is written to be engaged with, and then we have others on the team who are able to engage and respond when that content does go live. But the person posting the content can schedule it and go off and do other things, not have to be sitting around waiting for that post to go live. So we try to blend it and mix it a little bit, and we definitely recommend that to others too.
Great. And how would you recommend you engage with the audience? Is there any good best practices to do that?
Yeah, there's kind of a speed expectation on social media, which is great and understandable. I think it can sometimes feel a bit like a crunch for the team who's doing the responding. So we try to respond definitely within 24 hours to people who are actively seeking to engage with us. Oftentimes we'll try to do it, in less than 4 hours. ideally in less than an hour. I mean, ideally right away. So it's kind of a real-time conversation. So it's kind of just about doing the best you can. In the past, we have done drive-bys every day. So we would do a morning drive-by, pass through just to see what's out there. Then again in the afternoon. So we were checking it at least twice a day, and that seemed to be a pretty good cadence for us. And nowadays we have a bit of a bigger team, so we have someone constantly monitoring our social media feeds to engage with people who want to engage with us.
Great, but surely that can be a lot of work. So I'm thinking, do you have any tools you recommend to engaging with the audience and really keeping track of what's happening on your profiles?
Absolutely. Yeah, it can be a lot of work. It's even a lot of work with the right tools too. But there have been some that have been really helpful for us. So we use Buffer to schedule all of our social media posts. There's also some neat tools out there like Hootsuite and Sprout Social that do a similar job. And then we use a tool called Reply, which is a tool that we purchased a while back, and now it's like fully part of the Buffer family. And that basically it pulls all of our conversations on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram into one main inbox where we can reply to everything from one location. So we're still doing the work to reply, but we're doing it all like centrally rather than having to pop out and try to find and catch everything. So that has saved us a ton of time and it's made engagement possible for us at this scale.
Okay, so do you have any final remarks or recommendations for an e-commerce who wanted to start doing social media?
Yeah, I would definitely love to give some encouragement. If you're thinking of doing social media, go for it. You can do it. It's if it's something you've been thinking about but not sure if you have the time or energy to take it on, I think you'll surprise yourself. There's some really neat tools out there. We try to help people in this exact situation make social media possible for you. So if you're thinking about it, I say take the leap and go do it and reap the rewards. And then once you do it, a couple of quick tips would just be to be consistent, be active, and be yourself. And I think those three things will make a big difference for you.
Those were great. Kevan, thank you so much for your time. That was amazing.
Great. Thank you, Julie.
That's a wrap, podcast people. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode with Kevan Lee and are feeling ready to take over the social media. Before you leave, I would really love it if you could rate this podcast in your preferred podcast app. Thank you very much and see you soon.
This session of eCommerce Boost was produced by Sleeknote. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on tactics and strategies that'll help boost your e-commerce.